Maybe. There we go. Hello and welcome to the Legends of Tabletop podcast. We're getting ready to jump into episode 189. I've got Alan Bahr with me today from Gallon Night Games. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing well. It's been an extremely long time since we've had you on the show, so I'm glad to have you back.
Yeah, it's been 2016.
It's been a long time.
I think so. It was my second. It was Mechas and Monsters, right?
I think so. Yeah, it was like our episode,
which was my second Kickstarter. So it's been a while. Yeah.
So the reason this all came about, for the audience, I guess, Alan was on the Fandible podcast, which is one of my absolute favorite podcasts of all time.
They're great.
He ran a demo of Heirs of Heresy, and I listened to it, and of course they're great. Alan, ran a great game, and I was like, wow, this system is super interesting. I really like the take on this. I liked them. I was just completely intrigued. I went out, bought the book right away. It was on pre-order, I think, still at that time, or just getting ready to come out. And I rarely order books like sight unseen or, not having done any other research, but I was like, I have to have it. So I had to have Alan on to talk about it.
Well, happy to be here. Happy to talk about it. I'm glad it went so well. I love the folks at Fandible. They ran a few of my games, and every time it's just a joy to listen to. And they've had me on a couple times to play with them, which has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. They're great. And there's a link for the actual play of that in the show notes. If anybody wants to check that out, it's down below. Oh, so how have you been? How have things been with COVID? How are you holding up? Overall, how's things?
Overall, I would say things are good. COVID hit. My wife and I moved cross country a couple months later. I grew up in North Dakota, and we actually moved back to North Dakota, not to where I grew up, but just her job changed, and we came out here for her work. Nothing to do with me, actually, kind of happenstance. So I'm back in North Dakota, which is great in some ways. I love it. I'm a country boy at heart. So, less people, less everything. Right. We're doing adoption. We're adopting.
Oh, nice. Congratulations.
Yeah, we're excited. We're moving along that process. So we're adopting an older kid. So the process is a little different. It's never quite what coming into, right? But that's been a lot of fun. And a lot of everything else, I would say, probably. It's, it's a hard process for everybody involved.
Wow, stress.
But yeah, I mean, we're doing that. We moved, and we're just kind of weathering COVID. Wife works in logistics, so it's been kind of hectic over there.
Yeah, is she able to work from home at all, or no?
No, she actually works for HR in logistics.
Oh, yeah.
So she's in the office dealing with like people who get COVID or drivers who aren't driving and things like that, right? So it's been pretty hectic the last 2 years for her. I think she's ready for a nice year-long vacation.
I'll bet. Everybody in the plan is ready for that.
Yeah. But yeah, other than that, we've been good. How have you been?
Good, hanging in. Nothing really changed for me. I'm essential work. I work at a mine site, so I've been at work the whole time. We're pretty much spaced out. I work in the lab, so I'm not next to anybody necessarily during the day. We have mask requirements, all that stuff. I'm vaccinated. They offered it at work, which is great. Went down on lunch and got jabbed up, took the kids down. So all of our games are online. I mean, this is what we do to socialize. So
I had no online games before COVID, and now all my games are online. Which was one of the reasons that made moving so easy. Was all my social life had already transitioned online.
Yep. And
so when we moved, I was like, all right, this is already how I'm talking to everybody. This is how we're already playing our games for the most part,
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, just trying to truck along, keep moving. The world's crazy, and it seems like it's throwing me a new curveball every day, but you power through.
Now that has, with like shipping delays and all that sort of stuff, has that affected, you as a business owner? Have you seen any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah. Absolutely. We mostly print books, and we've always printed in the United States. So we haven't had to deal with the rising freight costs from China, which, it it was one of those happy, I look a lot smarter than I really am moments, right? Where we always printed in the US because I never wanted to like risk something going wrong or not being able to check we always print locally with like local printers so I can go down and see how things are going. Because I'm that kind of paranoid, you know.
Right.
Trying to be the jerk who's like in there every day, like, how's it going? How's it going? But you know, it's nice to know if there's an issue you can run down there.
Right.
And so when this all hit, I was like, whoa, I'm prepped. We were ready. We were doing this. We're good. My printers like me. We have a long relationship, so they're not. You know, we've been hit by rising paper costs. We've been hit by shipping delays cross country of pallets or things like that. But you know, well, it's been frustrating and it's been hard. It's definitely been less impactful than it's been on some of my colleagues and friends who, you know, make board games and are printing in China or whatever. You know,
yeah, you can't get away from it there.
So yeah, we've seen some hiccups. You know, we took a nosedive on printing a book that we funded before the pandemic, and then paper costs went up, and we'd already taken the money through Kickstarter. So you know, we took a hit there. We took a hit on shipping a couple times, but you know, stuff you can kind of work around and move through. So.
Right. And have you gotten any feedback from players, from fans, from consumers of RPGs that, you know, they're either upset or, you know, show support, you know, for, you know, small, you know, because all RPG, like if you're not, you know, Wizards, if you're not Chaosium, right, like it's usually just a couple of people, right? So like, you know, I think people tend to forget sometimes that like, hey, this is like one guy doing a thing.
I've been lucky. I've got a really great community that we get to interact with for Gallant Knight games. And they've been really patient with all the delays, which were frustrating, but relatively minimal because, you know, really once the PDF's out, it's just a matter of waiting for the book to show up. And sometimes it takes a couple weeks longer, but you know it's coming because the PDF is here, right? The only time we really had to make a major concession was there was that, you remember in March last year where everybody's there was like this week where just everybody was suddenly working at home, right? It just kind of a couple of companies did it and then it snowballed up and everybody was working from home. That was right in the last week of our Tiny Cthulhu Kickstarter. And so I had to come in and say, look, things are changing. I don't know what the deal is. We've already hit these 2 stretch goals, but we're going to cancel them. Because we want to have a cushion. We want to make sure, you know, we're prepared for any crazy eventualities. We don't want to go stretch too thin.
Yeah.
And everybody was super great with that. They're like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. We'd rather get the game and, you know you guys are going to make another game and than, you know, have an issue.
Yeah. Take a complete bath and break the bank.
Right. Yeah. No. And it was more of a conversation of we had planned to do these 2 stretch goals. Technically, we were going to unveil them today. In hindsight, you know, or in lieu of everything, we've made the decision to say we will get to them when we get to them. But right now we're going to focus on, you know, having a financial cushion in case something else goes wrong. And, you know, fulfillment delays, things like that. But everybody, for the most part, has been pretty patient, pretty considerate. You always have, and it's like anything, right? You got the really vocal, loud guys, but they're the minority, right? Those angry customers are always they're hard to ignore because they're so vocal.
So vociferous.
And it feels like a lot of them, but you know, you got to remind yourself in the mirror every morning. There's only like, you know, there's a half dozen. I just gotta, you know, and generally speaking, they're actually not that bad for us. So,
yeah, I find it's hard for me to judge sometimes, like, you know, being at least tangentially, you know, related to you know, industry stuff, right? Like my perception is different. Like, I don't care. Just like give me a book. If it's, you know, a year late or 2 years late, I don't care. I know that it's going to be done well. You know, the delays don't bother me as much because I know, right? Like it's just you or it's just Oscar and like 2 other people at Golden Press, right? So like, you know, if you have some sort of a relationship, whether it's as a consumer, like, you know, for me as a friend and, you know, podcaster and whatever, you know, it skews the perspective. So like, you know, for me, it's like, fuck it, take as much time as you want, but like, that's not most people.
Well, and I think it's definitely harder. And I see it more, you know, we still have problems. We still get some of this, but I see it more with people who are running their first or second Kickstarter nowadays over the last 2 years, because even when the pandemic hit, we had over 20 Kickstarters under our belt. People knew, we knew what we were doing. We were, you know, we weren't just doing something for the first time and having all these additional hurdles, we had a process, and now we were just adding new processes to overcome new hurdles, right? I see it more, and I've seen it on some of my colleagues and friends' Kickstarters where, you know, the world's crazy and they're like, look, I lost my job, or, you know, family stuff or whatever. It's going to be late. And people, you know, are relentless for a $5 or $10 pledge. They're like, no, I'm going to hound you on social media every day about my thing. Yeah. And to me, that's just totally, it's like, I get it. You paid money on a Kickstarter to get something. But also, like, if you paid $10, it's like, what, 2 cups of coffee, 3 cups of coffee? If you go to 1 cup, if you go to a really nice place, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, at a certain point, you can get that $10 back or it's just $10.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes you lose a $10 bill out of your pocket. Right. So, you know, every time I've had an issue, I've been able to say, look, you know, we're just people on the other side of the equation here. Yeah, our social media account has a picture of our logo and doesn't say Alan, it says whatever. Gallon again, right? But I'm still just me and my wife doing it. Like, we pack our boxes in our garage and ship them out. Like, this is not like we're not, you know, some 30-person company with a warehouse. We're 2 people making it work. And every time I've had to come back with that, people generally, you know, if it's been really bad, they usually apologize. And honestly, I've taken a non-public policy of, if somebody is really frustrating or difficult, I just refund them and move on.
That's not bad either.
They call it firing the customer, right? And I just like, I'm done. We're done here. Here's your money back.
Well, it's not worth the stress and the aggravation, right? Especially for $5 or $10 or whatever.
Well, right. And you're like, yeah, I paid $10. And I'm like, great. I made 3 of that. Right. So here's your $10 back. It's not worth it for $3 because that's what I'm going to get in my pocket today. But the gaming communities have been generally, I think, for the most part, remained relatively supportive and positive. And that's something I've appreciated over the last 2 years.
Right. And it's a part of the sense of the community, right? I mean, because it is a highly social thing. You're playing with friends, you're supporting locals, you're supporting, you know, indie creators and stuff. So like it is kind of baked in a little bit into the whole zeitgeist of, you know, buying and playing role-playing games.
Right, exactly. So, you know, I think in a lot of ways, this particular hobby or industry was better equipped to handle what was happening, as well as worse equipped to handle what was happening, right? Which is interesting, but I do think, you know, that has played into it.
And have you seen an uptick with the COVID stuff? Like, I remember in 2009, you know, we had the downturn, you know, things like comic books and movie sales and music, like all that stuff went up because, like, you couldn't go on vacation. You couldn't do, you know, a lot of things. A lot of people had lost jobs and, you know, money, wealth evaporated. So those sort of like hobby things, those smaller,
we definitely, our Kickstarters I wouldn't say are doing dramatically better. They're about where they were ish. Our post Kickstarter online sales have been stronger though. But this is counterbalanced, I'll point out, by the fact that, you know, for 6 to 8 months last year, most local game stores were closed. We didn't generate any revenue from local game stores. So yeah, the sales went up, but, you know, when I do my end of year analysis, it was up overall, but it wasn't as up as it seems because we had the offset losses from, we weren't in stores or conventions for a year. And in some places that's still the case, right? And stores might be open now, but they can't get stuff, or we can't get stuff to the stores through our distributors because of logistics issues. So we're kind of in this weird place where, hey, this is going really well over here, but this part isn't. And well, it's not undermining all this good stuff. It's definitely, you know, you're like, oh, we doubled our sales over here. Yeah, but we lost an equivalent of 50% of that over here. So really, we only went up 50%, right?
Yeah.
And those are just totally made up numbers. But so it's one of those things where it's not, I have to remind myself, it's not as good as it looks on paper sometimes, but it's also not as bad as it looks on paper, right? I feel like the last few years have been this, like, me learning to walk the middle road of like expectations on anything now. I'm like, well, it's not as bad as it could be, but it's not as good as it could be. I feel like that's just like a little space I now have to exist in every time I think about work or business stuff.
Right, right. And then the big seller too, with cons, all the cons being pretty much canceled last year, and then just a handful of cons this year. Like that's the moneymaker. You go out, you set up a table, you press the
Well,
flesh, show
and
the
you
games.
generate a lot of work that way. We meet artists who we hire, we meet freelancers we work with, people bring us game pitches we publish. Like, so all that stuff kind of goes away.
Yeah.
But we make do. The internet's if this had happened, 25 years ago, I think it'd have been a lot worse in some ways.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
the internet has made it easier for me to continue to sell my games without stores or conventions, and continue to interface with people or find new artists or authors or whatever. So in some ways the internet has made this a lot easier. In some ways it's made it worse because now I doom scroll everything and I'm just constantly like, don't just keep all the social media closed. I need to work today, not to think about how everything's on fire.
You're right. Do you have any cons coming up? I know they're doing PAX East, the Philly one, the board game one.
Unplugged, yeah.
Unplugged. Yeah.
That's in December. We're not going. For family reasons with the adoption stuff, we're unable to travel during that time.
Sure.
I am going to Ice and Dice in Cincinnati, and I believe it's in the back half of January. I don't have the dates in front of me, but it's coming up.
Sure.
I am one of their guests there, so we'll have a table. I will be there. I think a few of my some of the writers we work with a lot are local, and they're coming out to hang out. So there might be a few of us there. But yeah, that's at this point, that's the next con I have on my schedule. I don't know if there will be another one. Or if Gen Con's back up, we'll probably be at Gen Con in 2023 or 2022, I think. But it's hard to say. Yeah.
Well, with variants and all that kind of stuff. Did you participate in the Gen Con online for this year or no?
We facilitated some folks who are running games. But myself, I did not. That was actually, was I out of town? There was literally, there was a wedding.
Oh, okay.
One of my brother got married, so we were out of town. So I wasn't there anyway.
Sure.
But yeah, we facilitated some folks who ran some games, and we had, copies of things for sale through the vendor marketplace and stuff. So.
Okay, cool. All right, maybe we should talk about Heirs of Heresy a little bit.
Let's roll into Heirs to Heresy.
So were you approached by Osprey? Had you designed the game prior and were trying to sell it? How did that all come about?
No, so I saw Osprey was getting into RPGs, and I love Osprey, their historical line of work. I have most of their little blue Osprey books. I love them. They're great references for things. And I've always lamented that there's not more historical RPGs, because that's a genre I really like. Mm-hmm. But it's hard as a small business owner to say I want to make. There's a balance of I want to make something I like versus I want to make something that'll let me eat this month.
Right.
And it's hard, and so I always felt really uncomfortable saying I'm going to do a historical thing as like a big release with a lot of money behind it. And so this is literally how it went. I saw their stuff and I just tweeted at them saying, "Hey, Osprey, if you want some historically themed RPG pitches, hit me up." And then I just whatever. And then the next day I woke up and there was a Twitter DM from Osprey's account saying, "Hey, email us here." And I emailed and I talked with one of their, I talked with one of the folks from Osprey. He's their acquiring editor for the game line. I don't know what his exact title or position is anymore. But apparently he already knew some of my work from Gallant Knight Games. And so he was like, I have your stuff on our shelf. It's what I use when I pitched the game line to Osprey. Your stuff was one of the examples I brought in and said, look how they're doing it. We should do it kind of like this.
Nice.
In terms of like form factor and presentation. And I was like, oh, that's great. He's like, I'm a big fan, and hit me with your pitches. So I sent him, 4 or 5 pitches. And I'm a big Knight Templar buff, and he was as well. And he was like, that's the one. That's right there. That's the game I want to see made. And I was like, I'm happy to make it if you'd like to pay me for it. Like, we'll pay you for it and you can make it. And I was like, done deal. So I had not written it. I had thought about it. I maybe noodled on it, and I wouldn't say I wrote anything more than a page of notes prior to the pitch I sent. But yeah, and so I literally just tweeted at them and said, "Yo, I have ideas," and they were like, "Hey, let's do it." So that was kind of nice.
That's cool. And validation, right? I mean, they had your books on the shelf, right? So it wasn't.
I had not expected that, so that was nice to. It was nice to hear they had some. One of the things you always worry about as a creative, and it's a balance for me because at Gallant I can do whatever I want technically because I'm the boss and I'm the lead creative. To a degree, I control everything we put out. My wife actually has final say on everything, but I'm not going to let her know that. So if I write something, the buck kind of stops with me, or we both, right? Like, and so I have both this creative freedom, just do whatever I want, but I'm also financially on the hook for making sure I contribute to the family income, right? I've got to make sure Gallant does well enough that it can afford to pay me my salary. So there's this weird balance of total freedom / you're always on the hook. Mm-hmm. And when you pivot to do something for somebody else, that changes because you don't have total freedom, but you're also not as much on the hook, right? Like, so that was kind of great in some ways because we liked the pitch. I wrote it. And they gave me a lot of freedom. Like they weren't saying like, "Oh, change all this, put all this stuff in there." I think the book as printed was pretty much what I submitted, minus edits, errata, correction, right? Sure. Basic stuff like that. But they didn't come in and say change mechanics or, it was stuff like, "Oh, flesh out this section," or "We'd like to rearrange the book in this way," or whatever, right?
Right.
We think this sentence is poorly worded. Can you reword it? Stuff like that. There are a few mechanical things we changed based on their feedback, but for the most part, they kind of just let me go nuts with it. And that I don't have to deal with like logistics. I don't have to deal with art direction. I gave them art notes. I approved all the pieces of art that came in, or not even approved so much as just said, "Hey, that looks great. You're doing a great job. Go team." Right?
You guys are killing it.
I wouldn't pretend like I actually had any real say other than I love it. Yeah. But the artists, the ones I picked, they let me pick the artists, and they worked it out with those artists, and it was a great experience, and it was totally different from the way I normally get to produce a role-playing game, which is really nice.
That's cool. How long did it take you to put everything together from pitch to final copies?
No, we were on a truncated timeline because of COVID. They wanted it to be released in October of this year, which meant it needed to be delivered by October of last year. Oh. Because it takes about a year to edit, layout, art, and then print and ship, right?
Sure.
And so I think I play tested it, and got it all sorted to them in about 6 months.
Wow.
On top of my normal. At that time, I was still doing Gallant and still doing my day job. So.
That's nuts. Is that the quickest you've ever put out a setting or a book like that?
Nope.
No.
No. You mean in terms of just me writing it?
Yeah.
Because there was this year of other stuff, right?
Yeah.
No, we, some of our Kickstarters, because we work on them in advance or whatever, we turn them around in 6 months or so.
Right.
But it's definitely stressful. This was a lot less stressful.
Yeah.
I kind of just handed off the document, and they'd email me, "Hey, here's the edits. What do you think?" I'm like, "Oh, I like this edit. I don't like this one. I disagree," or whatever, right? And that was it. 20 minutes of my day done.
Right.
Sometimes a couple hours if I had to reread a bunch of stuff, but it was, once I handed it off, it was kind of just in their hands, and I was able to walk away. Other than whenever they needed me, they'd let me know, and I, do the thing. But yeah, the writing itself wasn't so hard as much as getting all the play testing, because I pushed a lot of little envelopes mechanically, I feel like, and we put the game through a lot of play testing. Mm-hmm. To make sure it hung together the way I wanted it to. And that took more time because we're in the middle of a pandemic. I'm trying to organize these play tests for a game, and I've created a initiative system that is less easy to use online
Oh yeah.
than that, and so that was interesting. So that was I would say the playtesting was actually the hardest part of the development process more than anything else.
Right. And do you have like a go-to group? I mean, you have like your regular group. Do you start with them first?
Yeah, I've got my personal playtest group who we play with, and they playtest most of my games. Some of the Gallant stuff, like the Tiny D6 line of games, those need less playtesting because I've written so much of them, written so many different iterations or whatever between the monthly content and the big books that I've got a pretty good grasp on that.
Sure.
But with new stuff, we definitely, we go to that playtest group. And this time I kept it to them. Normally I have some other playtest groups I roll out to with Gallant stuff because Gallant compensates them for their playtests. But this one was just my local group. And so, yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
We do have a question from Twitter as well. Will Phillips asked, he's interested in the high-level design decision on how much history versus how much fantasy to focus on, and if that was something that was something that you were driving, or if that was more of an interest of the publisher.
That was definitely I was able to set the scope for the book entirely in terms of content. And they were really great about letting me have that kind of say. So when I came in, I always wanted the game to be a toolbox. I wanted something that was a collection of mechanical tools that you could use to craft your ideal Knights Templar conspiracy campaign, right? And so I knew I had to have everything from the straight historical sort of gameplay where the Templar treasure is gold and you're taking off with that, or all the way up to that Da Vinci Code, Angels and Demons, right? The Templar treasure is the Holy Grail, and now you're trying to secret it away from France, right?
Right.
So mechanically, the game always had to support that wide range and that gamut. In terms of the writing, I kind of set the tone of that. I set the pace. Frankly, I probably wrote less about the historical elements than the fantasy, mostly because you can wiki the historical stuff, right?
Sure.
I can say, go Google history of the Knights Templar and the Holy Knights Templar, right? Or go read this book or whatever. I can't tell you to go Google how the 11 circles of the secret papers of King Solomon unlock Gnostic magic, because that's totally made up right in the book, right? Like, so by necessity, I think the history side gets a little bit of I won't say a short shrift, but there's definitely less of it, or less of a focus on it, because it's easier to support outside of the game. And that was my decision the whole way through.
But even with that, there's still a nice chunk. I think about 10, 12 pages right in the front of the book that, pretty much lays out the history in, very broad strokes.
Yeah, I really wanted to give enough of a historical background that you could hand it to a player who knew nothing, and they could read it and at least have an idea of what they were looking at, right? Mm-hmm. So they wouldn't be totally lost. But I think I threw a timeline of the Crusades. That's literally like First Crusade, Second Crusade.
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, I could put all the stuff that happens, but I only have so many pages. Like, I gotta not do that at some point.
And each one of those entries is like a
whole
book,
You could write more than one book about most of those entries.
Yeah.
So there was this, and then one of those things is always, you look back and you go, oh, I pulled back too far. I didn't include enough here, or I overshot it here, right? And so anytime you're dealing with that, that's definitely something I think is going to happen as an author and a creative. And as a publisher, even, you look at it and you go, I wouldn't do it this way, or I would say, let's just do an extra page here, right?
Right.
But you do the best you can, and you try to do what feels appropriate or best or right. So no, Osprey was really great. They kind of let me set the tone and the pace for all of that. And frankly, if there's something wrong in there, or you don't like it, or it's bad, that's on me. And if anything you like, is probably the byproduct of Osprey. So we'll just go with that. That's a safe bet usually.
Right. And on the flip side, there's a section in the back too that kind of outlines some of the various conspiracies, or sort of gives you a through line for a particular type of conspiracy, right? So like offsets that historiosity that I really like, and and it is modular, right? So if you don't want to use magic, if you don't want to use the esoterica, if you don't want to use gifts like the Grail, or this, Spear of Longinus, I guess if you want to throw that in there, it's not in the book.
Right.
Easy enough to add. You can mix and match all of those pieces to really craft the kind of game that your players want. And I really like that modularity.
Yeah, that was really, honestly, that was the biggest push for me. Was I needed to have all these discrete elements that you can pull out or plug in to make the game you want, right? Like, because everybody's gonna want something different. And to me, that's where all the replayability is. All right, we played through it with a lot of magic, and there's dragons and demons. Let's do it as like a historical epic, right? Like the Kingdom of Heaven, right? Yeah. That kind of like Gladiator, Ridley Scott historical epic vibe. And so you can do that, right? And so you kind of tell the same story every time, but the way you tell the story and the obstacles and problems and the part of the game you have to use is going to change every time you tell the story, which I think is really exciting because it rewards you because you get comfortable with the mechanics, but then you get to deploy them in new ways. And that's a lot of fun, right? It's really exciting to watch a player go, okay, I know these rules really well. We're on our second campaign. Oh, we're gonna add this new rule. Oh, here's a clever way to use it. And watch those wheels and that engagement really start to go.
Yeah, and the length of campaigns too. There's modularity for that, where you can run a short campaign, a medium campaign. You can mix and match the elements. So maybe your short campaign, you're trying to get to England, and we go heavy magic, and there's dragons, St. George and all that. And then, maybe you do the longer historical campaign, and hell, you're trying to get to Portugal. And, there's journey rules and, foraging, and like, it's like D&D, right? Oh, the travel that takes 6 months is like 4 die rolls, but to jump a pit takes 4 hours or whatever, right? But there is mechanical stuff where you can, and I like, it almost has like a heat mechanic. So if they're in the wilderness, you roll a D6 and, 4 or 5, the pursuit stuff. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah.
I really liked how those came out. I was really proud of them. I felt like they really captured the feeling. And one of the things, as a GM, I've been GMing for over 20 years now. So a lot of this stuff I don't think about. I just do what I do, right? And so over the last year to 2 years, I've had a really conscious bent in my game writing and game design to say I need to do better at communicating how the game is supposed to be ran, both via mechanics as well as just telling you, like, the goal of this rule is to give the GM tools to modulate pursuit. Like, so he's not just, the GMs, they're not just winging it. They're not just saying, now the Inquisitors show up, right? Nah, that's not what we're doing, right? Like, by codifying it and putting mechanical frameworks around it, it helps a new GM leverage the rules in a way that is, I'm going to say, safe in terms of game balance, right? They're not as, it's the whole challenge rating argument. Challenge rating is great because what it does is it gives the GM a safety net if they're worried or inexperienced, they might kill their party. But if the GM isn't worried about that, or the GM is really experienced, they know that challenge rating is not really a thing you need. You just, if the monster is dying too fast, just give it some extra hit points. If it's not hurting the players enough, just give it a bigger damage die, right? Those are all those little GM tricks we learn. And so, yeah, I could split run the game and go, oh, now the Inquisitors show up, because I've learned how to structure games with narrative tempo. But what I need to do is help people who are running the game, because I can't come teach them how to run the game. So I need to make sure the rules teach them on how I see the game being ran, so they know what the framework is, and then they can change it for their table and make it unique.
Yep, and it keeps the tension up. It's thematically so appropriate. As they're fleeing from France and they're trying to get to some other safe location, but roll D6, and like 50% of that time, it's not going to be safe, right? Like that's fuck, like,
yeah,
that's stressful.
I was trying to model a level of tension based on where we stopped for the night, right? And one of the things I did is I tied how you spend your advancement points to where you stop, right? Like when you rest away from civilization, your at way less risk of getting ambushed or caught or being noticed, right? You can hide better. You have a higher chance of removing these pursuit points. But there's certain actions you can't do. You can't repair your gear. You can't level up. You can't, pray at a church because that's not a thing. And so you do have to go to town if you want to do some of the things you need to do to make it out, right? And then in town, you have to risk these pursuit points. So I was really happy with how that came out. I think it helps the GM structure the narrative really well. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I really like that. And we talked about toolkit again, super useful. And even we were talking pre-game as I was going through it. I'm like, oh, I love this mob mechanic. I can use this and this other thing. I really like. Oh, if you roll a 1 on one of your damage dice, it reduces the damage reduction of your foe. So like even in a straight D&D game, like right, you just rip that out, add it through, and like
very proud of that mechanic. I
love that.
Because nothing feels worse than getting a hit and doing low damage, right? And so instead, I took the damage die and said, "Okay, if you roll a 1 and like some of it's like 1 or 2, whatever, right? If you roll a certain number or less, you don't do a lot of damage, but you get some sort of kicker effect. You get a bonus, right?" And I tried to tie it to the weapon. So like on the dagger, it just ignores reduction because it slides through a crack in their armor, right? It slides through a hole in their chainmail. The mace, lets you reduce the reduction because you shatter their shield or you dent their chainmail. Things like the axe just lets you shatter something they're carrying or wearing, things like that. And that let me play with the damage die. So like the mace is really. I had a player who was like, "Oh, the mace stinks. It only does 2d4 damage." And then they realized that anytime a 1 comes up, they get to do the reduction. And they're like, "Oh, that's really cool." They're like, "That's good. I like." It kind of clicked for them. Like, "Oh, yeah, it doesn't do a lot of damage, but it's going to consistently just destroy armor, destroy gear, right?"
And it's permanent. The reduction's permanent until if that fearsome foe were to get away and repair armor and come back,
right.
Like in a real sense, like it's forever.
Yeah,
it's just that combat.
Right. Yeah, and so watching that kind of click as the mechanics happened was really exciting for me because when I first presented the game and I told the players how the mechanics work. So for those of you watching, right now or later, the basic mechanic in Heirs to Heresy is a 2d10 roll plus your stat plus your skill versus target number, right? So you roll 2d10, you combine them. So if I roll a 5 and a 6, I have an 11. I add my stat, which is 3. I add my skill, which is 3. So I have a 17. And if 17 is equal to or higher than the target number, I did it, right? Mechanic damage is done in dice sizes, so like D4, D6, D8, D10. And so the idea is that as you are doing things, the dice you are rolling are going to impact what happens, right? And so I roll these D10s, I do the thing. I hit the guy, great, I hit him. Now I have to roll damage. And damage is reduction. Okay, I rolled a 5, your armor is 7, I didn't get through, right? But now with the mace, I rolled a 5, your armor is 7, I didn't get through, but now your armor is 6 for the rest of the fight, right? And it creates this tactical element where even if you don't think you can damage anything at all, swinging that weapon can still be useful, And then I tried to, when I presented that to the players, they were like, the immediate response was, "Oh, it's just D&D. You just swapped out the D10s for the D20." And I'm like, well, I feel like that's inaccurate. Let's play the game and see. And about the second session, the player who had said that to me was like, "Yeah, I was wrong." He's like, "The tactical choices are simple but really interesting, and there's enough of them that I don't feel overwhelmed, but enough that I don't feel like it's too simple, right? There's this balance." And that was the thing I was most nervous about because the combat system is where I kind of take the biggest swath of changes to, we'll call it conventional RPG wisdom, maybe, in a lot of ways, because when you're fighting mobs, they don't get to act unless you fail your roll. Because a mob of peasants with pitchforks is not going to engage a fully armored, fully trained Knight Templar, arguably the greatest warrior in the world at that time, right? Yeah. In Europe. They're best trained, best equipped. Like, a Knight Templar is a verifiable badass, right? And so no random peasants can be like, "You know what I should do? I should just go after this guy in chainmail with a great sword with my pitchfork," right? And so what happens is mobs only act when you fail. So if you attack a mob and you miss, then they're like, oh, there's an opening, and they surge in and attack, right? But if you just keep hitting them, you can just mow through the mob and move on because you're a Templar and they're a mob, and that's how this works now, right? And then when you fight fearsome foes, which are foes on your level or higher, generally speaking, now you have to worry about trading blows, and there's an action economy you have to manage and work through. And I think it's on the surface, it appears to be very similar to a lot of other games in some places and pretty different in some places. And I think it can be jarring on first read, but every time somebody's played it through, they've always like, oh, this really sings. Or like this combat system feels engaging. It feels full of options and choices without feeling overwhelming. That's what I want, right? And that's what I wanted in the game. I wanted something that felt like I was a warrior making a choice when I pull out my weapon and swing my weapon. But I also didn't want to be like, all right, so the Saix dagger does 5 damage. The hunting dagger does 6 damage, but it only has 1 armor. I didn't want that, right?
Yeah.
So I was trying to find this balance, and you can tell that I'm really proud of it because I keep talking about it, but I'm really proud of the fact
I
that
love it. Yeah, it's
where
great.
we landed there. I think that is one of the most engaging combat systems I was able to kind of design around the existing kind of core conventional RPG framework ideas.
Yeah, no, I loved it. Like I said, when I listened to that Fandible game, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. I like this, right? And you get to, it's not a D20. You roll more dice. You got 2D10, right? So it's a little different. It's a little bit more interesting. It's not a dice. It's not, World of Darkness where you're 30 D10 and keep 10s or whatever, but it is a little different, to me, a little bit more engaging. And it did remind me a little bit of like, World of Darkness and like, give me a wits plus composure. Right? So you're taking your stat and a skill, you're adding all the stuff together plus your, bonuses and stuff. So like it sort of hit that note for me a little bit.
Yeah.
Just like sort of tangentially like, oh, this sounds like something I already know.
Right.
But yeah, really cool. I love the mob mechanic too. It's so, and it's not even that they're not acting, right? Like thematically in my head, it's like they are acting, but they're so inept, right? Like they kind of jab with a thing, but like you're in armor and you've got a shield.
Yeah, it's more like a bunch of farmers waving pointed sticks at you, and you're like, I'm wearing armor, and so you can just walk past them, or they kind of yell at you, and you threaten them, and they back up, right?
Yeah.
It's the idea that they don't want to really mess with you; they're just there to be an obstacle,
right? Yeah, and they can do a lot of damage. I mean, you present that opening, and boy, they can pack one hell of a wallop.
Yeah, I one of my first players, they had a couple combats, and they're like, oh, it's just a mob, and he failed 2 rolls in a row, and the mob just rolled him, and he was like, oh, that was not pleasant. Because I was describing like this mob just swarming him and like burying him down and just beating him, and they could put the hurt on, and he was like, I don't like this. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And his friends had to come pull him out. But like, it's interesting because that was an unintended side effect. He was so competent in battle because he's a Templar that he got cocky in game and then paid the price, right? And I was like, oh, I have accidentally, completely unintentionally modeled this thing that happens, right? And I just watched it happen at my table.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little like, oh, hey, maybe I didn't do a good job kind of moment, right? There's those things where you're like, I don't know if this is working. Then that happens. You're like, oh, it is working. Okay. Right. And so for me, it's just, I haven't had as much fun playtesting the game as I had playtesting this game in a long time.
And you want to talk a little bit about the foes that you face. There's no stats, right? So it's 2d10 plus the number of Templars in the scene is going to determine what the rolls are. This is your
generally speaking, that is how it plays out. So there's 2 ways it works. There's opposed rolls. So foes don't have stats. What I've done is I've tried to say, look, this is a story about mythic heroes trying to accomplish a mythic task. Even if we're doing the gritty historical epic, it's still relatively mythic, right? And so the opposition is always as hard as the Templars need it to be, kind of, right? It's like the idea that your Templars, your chosen warriors of the Catholic Church and God, and so the opposition against you is the world arrayed against kind of God's chosen. And so the basic idea is that when you roll as the GM to do something to oppose a Templar, it is 2d10 plus a number equal to the number of Templars in the scene. And that's it. That's the general roll to make it happen. And in combat, it's a little different. Enemies have some combat stats to make combat a little more intuitive and easier for the same reason, right? Like I don't want to be like, oh, this mob is always better or worse or whatever. I wanted specific action. So enemies have an attack and damage bonus, but otherwise they are generally just as competent as there are Templars in the scene. And that's that.
Yeah. I
wanted something that was easy if you're the GM. Because as a GM, a lot of games I end up hung up on little details. And I'm like, this is not relevant, right? And I long for these. One thing I love is the cipher system has how hard is something on a scale of 1 to 10, right? And that's so great. And then they go multiply it by 3, and then you need to roll over that. And I'm always like, why can't we just do it with a D10 and have a 1 to 10, right? That's that as a GM, that's so easy. I can ask how hard is this on a scale of 1 to 10? It's a great GM question, right? And the cipher system does such a good job with it because they go, this is a 6, this is a 6, right? And so you instinctively kind of have these built-in benchmarks on how hard something is. And I love that about the cipher system. And I wanted something almost equivalently easy. How competent are the enemies? Well, they're as competent as the Templars are because there are 3 Templars here. And so they have a +3. 1 Templar, they have a +1. Right? It's easy as the GM. You don't have to stop and go, okay, he's flanking, he gets a +2, right? This cleric over here is buffing, so they get an additional +2. There's none of that going on here.
Right.
I've tried to say, I want to reduce the friction points where the GM is making decisions so the GM can just focus on the narrative. And so when I was writing the game, I tried to pinpoint these spots where I was like, this is where I feel hung up. How do I fix that? And then I would try to fix it. And some of the fixes aren't ones I would do anymore because as we play tested or we worked on the game, they move, they iterate, they grow past that, But I really like where we ended up on this.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. You just mentioned questions in passing. I really like the questions at the front of the book. As you get started, was you're creating your character. When did you join the order? Who are you friendly with? And then, another section with relationships, because I feel like, you never know if this is going to be the first game that somebody plays. Right. And, if they come in and they don't really have a sense of well, how does this work? And, what's a PC? What does this mean? Right. it allows them to sort of focus in and drill down a little bit on oh, this is what this means. It helps to create relationships within the group. I really like that. And not all books do that. And I really appreciate the fact that you have something like that in there.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, that definitely goes back to that kind of I wanted to make sure we put the framework in place for the people who needed it, because not everybody needs every framework in a game. But it can be easy to forget that or jettison that or assume we only need right. So I was trying to say, I definitely tried to present the book as here's all the stuff, and then when you don't need it, feel free to just start throwing it out wholesale or add new stuff in, make whatever changes you want.
And I think even for experienced players, right? Because not to necessarily get jaded, because I look forward to every game that I'm in, every new system, even old system. Right. We played 100 times, and sometimes maybe you lose sight of it. You get a high concept, oh, I'm going to do this thing, and
right.
You just got a party of murder hobos with no sort of relational basis. So even just bearing that in mind, then to maybe sit down and ask some of these questions at the start of any game in a session 0. I really like that. I think we're probably going to start doing that.
Well, cool. I'm glad it worked. That was kind of a last minute ad, if I'm being honest. I was looking, I felt like the character section wasn't quite where I needed it to be. And I was trying to go over, and I was like, I need to help people because part of the problem is you're all Templar. There's no wizards, there's no thieves, you're a Templar. Here we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what does that look like outside of this? Part of that was I was like, I need to help people understand how they make a Templar who is different from the Templar next to them at the table, right? And so that's kind of where those "where are you from? How did you get here?" questions come in. And then I was like, I also need to make sure that when you start, because every campaign starts with the Templar Order falling under assault from France. That's the first adventure in the book, and where it goes from there is up to you. I was like, but I need to make sure that these are people you want to have by your side as you're fleeing, right? There is some strength to the whole we're shoved together, we don't know each other. But there's also a lot of strength of this is my buddy, we've been to war, to hell and back. I'm making sure Jean-Pierre gets out the door, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, he went down, I'm going back, right? Because that's what you want in sort of this military historical fantasy genre. You want those awesome Band of Brothers style moments for these characters. And so, it all kind of at the end, I was looking at it and I was like, this is lacking. How do I fix this thing? And those were the solutions I came up with.
Nice. And do you want to talk about character creation a little bit?
Yeah. So the way character creation works is you focus on, I call them pick lists and bundles. So the idea is you will decide what kind of knight you are at 2 different points. So at the start, you have to decide if you are a focused or a well-rounded knight. I've changed the terms a couple times during the writing process. So if I get them wrong, I apologize. What that does is if you are a focused knight, you get a specific stat array where your stats can be higher, but your lower stats are lower. And if you're a well-rounded knight, they aren't quite as high, but you have a bonus in everything. Right. And so you make that decision. And then you look at your skill packages and you have to choose if you are, I forget what I call them.
Yeah, I think I have it marked in here.
I don't even know where my copy of the book is at the moment, actually.
Dedicated. Let's see now.
There it is. Versatile and dedicated.
Yep. And then focused. Yeah. Focused and well-rounding is the skill points. The focused.
Okay. Dedicated and versatile. Yeah. Sorry. So people watching, sorry. I turned the game in over a year ago. I'm sorry. So if you are a dedicated knight, you have higher attributes, but you also have lower attributes. If you are, we said it was called what now? Versatile knight. You have less high attributes, but all your attributes have a bonus. So you make that decision, and then you go to your skills. And you make the decision of: am I a focused knight or am I a well-rounded knight?
Well-rounded.
And the difference is a well-rounded knight gets more skill points to spend, but they can't go as high. Whereas a focus knight has less skill points, but they can take their skills higher. And so by picking one of these 2 bundles, you can create a pretty good spread of character interactions. Then inside the skill point bundle, you spend your skill points on skills. So then you have your own customization. But it all plays really quick, which was a goal for me. I really wanted it to be something where, especially once you've done it, you can sit down and make a character in 10 minutes and be done. Super easy.
Right.
So the funny
I was just a little disappointed that there wasn't a point buy, because that's like my preferred anymore, is to be able to,
So there actually is a point buy. All the math in there is a point buy.
Oh, okay.
I just hit it behind these bundles.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you can figure it out, there's a point buy there, but I'm not going to tell you what.
All right. I have to go back to the book then.
I think the attribute point buy is pretty obvious. I think it's literally just there's 15 points of attributes, and I've forced you to spread them in this way.
Yeah. I didn't look that close.
I think if you add them all up, they come out to the same number. The skills are a little different because you get different amounts of skill points. But,
Sure.
But yeah, there is technically a point buy, and that's how I created these bundles. But then I wanted to reduce. There's a balance to options, and it's a difference between complication and complexity. Mm-hmm. So if you've ever read or studied Dieter Rams. Dieter Rams is an industrial designer from Germany, famous for if you have ever seen the classic kind of almost not Art Deco, but the minimalist like Braun razor design, stuff like that. The Braun radios, all that really minimalist, stripped down. That's Dieter Rams kind of, okay. And he was a big influence on the first iPod. So that kind of that minimalist, straightforward. The thing does what it does. I'm a big fan of that. And one of the things he talks about is less but better, and complexity, not complication. Complication is bad. Complication is friction. Complexity is interesting choices and options inside a controlled framework, right? And less but better means we take out the stuff we don't need and we make the stuff we do need do it better. And so this bundle and then point buy spread was designed to accomplish that. There's less choices, but the choices you make are better because they are more complex, but they're not complicated. Right. And so that was my goal working through that with that bundle. So while there is a point buy, and you could do an advanced character creation where your character can do whatever you want. This specific setup was designed to give you enough choices to be interested in your character, enough control to make the character you want to make, while not slowing down character creation to the point where it hampers your ability to play or participate in the game.
Right. You don't want to be 2 hours trying to make a character.
Right. Yeah, that's not, it's not fun for you. I mean, it might be fun for you, but it's definitely not fun for everybody else who wants to play the game and they're waiting for you. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
And then you can increase skills and attributes by acquiring advancement points, and you acquire advancement points by rolling criticals on your rolls.
That's one of the ways. You actually can also acquire them by helping other characters with their tests. But you're capped on how many you can get per session by your faith. So
faith or intellect, right?
Faith or intellect. Yep. So and I believe it's whichever is higher. So if you are an exceptionally faithful knight, you can get more advancement points. If you're an exceptionally intelligent knight, you can get more advancement points. And you get them by criticals, or you get them by providing aid to another Templar in a scene. And if they're successful, everybody who helped them gets an advancement point, which is actually the easiest way, and it puts it fully in the player's control. You can get as many advancement points up to your limit as you want per session.
Right. And the criticals are same number on a successful die roll on 2d10.
Yep, say it doubles on the 2d10 is a critical.
Yep. And while you were playtesting, did that seem like it happened often enough that, so a character with a faith of, like say 3 or 4 would probably be pretty high. Is that a pretty routine action? Does it seem to come up often? I mean, I guess so, right? Like it's the mechanics for the book, right? I wondered, like, wow, it seems like it would be hard to acquire that many points, right?
It can be, but that's one reason we have the teamwork.
Helping. Yep.
Right, is because I'm a big believer in putting a lot control of things in the player's hands up to a point. And one of the things I think players should control that they don't in most RPGs is their advancement. I think the idea that the GM controls advancement is a bit contrived and silly, especially for where games are. And so I'm a big fan of, the old Chaosium BRP system does that, where if you critical, you get a check, right?
Yeah.
But you don't control your advancement because you have to critical, and then you have to roll over your thing to advance it, right? Mm-hmm. So the dice control your advancement. And I wanted something that was like had that feel, but was not dependent on the dice. It was dependent on the player making a decision. And I wanted to reward the players who acted like a unit of well-trained knights. Right? Like these are people who should work together and should work together well. This is what they should be good at. And so I really wanted to reward that. And that was the perfect place to slot in that player level control of advancement points.
And the helping is super powerful because you get up to 3 characters to help a knight with an action. And there's like 3 or 4 different options that you can take. You get a reroll, a bonus, use your skill.
Roll,
so it's super powerful for a unit, cohesive units of knights to work together. You just like crush, whatever the skill task is, Yep.
Yeah, that's deliberate.
I like that. It makes sense.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I learned several years ago that I've been working to apply better and better and more fluidly over the years as I've designed more games is the idea that every mechanic in the game should push the intended feel and narrative forward, right? So the teamwork rules are a good example of that. When you do the teamwork rules, you feel like a group of military badasses doing a thing together, right? Mm-hmm. And that's deliberate. That's what I want them to feel like. That's why the teamwork rules are the way they are, right? When you when combat happens and those hits are bouncing off your armor and you're chewing through a mob, that's still, again, right? I am attempting to evoke a very specific feel. And so then I tried to make sure I didn't add any rules in that did not land on that feel. They didn't land on that space, because that's the space I want the game to exist in for the players.
Right. And it still can be super, like, even with all of that, you fail a roll or 2 rolls against the mob and they, roll over you and bowl you under and somebody's got to come pull you out, right? Like, there's still a lot of push and pull and tension within, even like we're super badasses, right? Because it's the randomness of not only just a die roll, but like the simulation of like in combat, like, fuck, you fall down and you get swarmed, right? Like, stuff happens.
Right. And so I definitely didn't want to end up on the players have final say, control everything element, because I do want that risk of that classic, 70s, 80s RPG feel of we could die with a bad roll.
Mm-hmm.
I think to a degree that's important in this kind of game, because we're doing a game in a historical setting where life is kind of cheap at times, right? We've had several wars over 100 years. Life has been treated very cheaply. And so the mechanics also need to reinforce that while reinforcing this mythic hero take. And so I worked really hard to try to find a really good balance between that. And I'm really happy where the game landed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also point out that, the Knights have, faith skill. They have faith points, and they can use those faith points to, re-roll and do certain things, kind of functions like Moxie or, fate points in like a Rogue Trader game or something like that, which is also good, right? It's, you're imbued with the faith of your spirit and religion, whatever. So like, you're able to dig deep and like, try to bowl that guy over, whatever. Like, I like having the option to be able to, like, because some people, like, their dice are just terrible, or like maybe it's just it's that night and like you just can't do anything. Like, oh, fuck, right. I spend a faith point and I re-roll. I'm just gonna do it.
Yeah. Well, and that was deliberate for me, because I have friends who have that problem. The dice hate them, right? And I have friends who the dice love, and it can be unfun sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make sure that the players have enough tools to kind of dial the game to their level of fun within reason. So that was a big push.
Yep. And the mass battle rules, they look interesting. Does it feel sort of board gamey when you drop down into that level?
It feels like a really stripped out board game or war game, which is deliberate. That's what I wanted. I wanted that zoomed out tactical feel of pushing units across the map.
Right.
So, yeah,
that's what that. Yeah, it has an interesting mechanic with the army points, and how those flux based on positional relationships, advantage, disadvantage, size of opposing forces, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm really happy with those.
How long does it typically take to play out a mass battle like that in what you've play tested?
The first time we did it, it was pretty much the whole session, with some setup and takedown and pieces. But once we had done it a couple of times during one of our campaigns, because I ran 3 campaigns during playtesting, we knocked out a mass battle, I want to say, in 15 to 20 minutes once or twice.
Wow, nice. Okay.
Because the mechanics are pretty straightforward once you know them. So we quickly we just moved to the side, threw out some note cards, wrote down what unit was, and we used poker chips for the army points. So we'd stack poker chips on the note card, right? Like 6 army points, 6 poker chips, right?
Yep.
Red are our guys, green are their guys, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So we were able to kind of knock that out super fast. So that was nice. And if you've done them a few times, they play pretty quick, which is great.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely want to check that out, because that looks like an interesting subset, sub game, within the system. I like that.
Yeah, I was really proud of that one and how it ended up.
And you mentioned earlier that you got to pick the artists or suggest the artists for the game. I will let you say their names. I am not going to hazard to guess. The art is beautiful. I love the art.
It's gorgeous. And unfortunately, I also would struggle to say their names. They are from Eastern Europe, and I admit it's difficult. One of the artists who does the chapter splash pages and the cover was one that Osprey actually brought to me, who I had seen before and had been on my list. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. I'm wanting to work with this artist. And then the other artist who does kind of the more painterly pieces in there, did like all the pre-gen characters and all that stuff, She was one I brought in and said I would really love to have her work on this. I love her style. And they were like, yeah, absolutely. And they reached out to her and she was available and they worked it out and it was great.
Yeah, I like that, like painted on fabric.
Yeah.
Look for all this. It's just such a cool
headers. Writing the art descriptions for those was super hard because they asked, because we were kind of on this truncated timeline. And they're like, we need the art descriptions, so we're going to get started. And I'm like, okay, well, the book's not done. I don't know what the chapters are for the chapter headers. And so there's a point where I was writing it, and I was like, I haven't written this chapter, and I commissioned art for it. I need to write this chapter that doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
Or I changed the structure, and I was like, hey, I need to repurpose this piece for a different chapter. Hey, it all works out. But it was definitely, there was a few points where I was like, I might have missed the mark on that one here. The things you learn, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's all beautiful regardless.
It's so gorgeous.
If anybody can't tell, I love this book. I love this system. I am just, like I said, I was blown away when I listened to it. I went out and ordered it right away. I got the PDF and the hard copy.
Oh, thank you.
It's fantastic. People should check this out. I love all the little pieces of it. I like the fact you pull it apart and the art, like everything. It's the complete package for me. I just love it.
I really appreciate that a lot.
I guess we probably start wrapping this up. Is there anything else that you have coming up? Anything you're working on? Anything you want anybody to know about?
So Gallant Knight Games, my company, has a Patreon, patreon.com/GallantKnightGames, where we produce material for our Tiny D6 line. If you check out my blog, alanbahr.net, in the next couple of weeks, there might be some extra bonus tidbits for Heirs to Heresy on there.
Ooh.
There's some like magical artifacts or things that didn't make the cut into the book. So, those things might show up there. We'll see.
I will check.
But yeah, most of my work comes out through Gallant Knight Games. So for future work, the best place to find me is Gallant Knight Games, Twitter, Gallant K Games. We're about to release our Gallant Verse campaign guide, our campaign guide for our Tiny Supers RPG is coming out in 2 weeks, stuff like that. So, we release a lot of stuff. I try to keep busy.
Yep, and you have to, right? As an indie guy, like if you're not working, you're not earning.
Yeah, that's how it works usually.
Yeah. All right, cool. There's a link in the show notes to order Heirs to Heresy, link to Osprey Games. They also have very cool stuff over there as well. We want you to check that out. I want to thank you for coming on. Like I said, when I ordered the book, I was like, fuck, I got to reach out to Alan because I just have to talk to him about this book.
Well, I appreciate it. And it was good to come back on. It's been a while, so I was excited to hear from you.
Yeah, we should probably do this more often. I mean,
we probably should.
Every time Oscar has something, he's like, "Hey, is it okay if I come on?" I'm like, "Of course." Like, all you do is ask.
All right, well, I'll start messaging and be like, "Yo, I got a book. Well, come on, let me show my book."
Yeah. That's what we're here for.
All right. Well, I'll start being proactive with you about it.
And I'll try to be a little bit more proactive and listen on Twitter and the social medias a little bit more and see what you've got going on.
It happens.
Sweet. All right. Hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I did. Please go out and order the book. Again, there's a Patreon for Alan as well, Gallant Knight Games. We have coffee for sale. If you are a coffee aficionado, I have coffee on order that hopefully comes today. It's the legendary brew. It's a nice, easy drinking medium roast. It's roasted by our own GM Neil. If you use the code Legends10, you're going to get 10% off your order. And you can find that at tinyurl.com/legendary brew. Or hit the link in the show notes. We also have a Patreon, but as we just do this for sort of fucking around, throw money at Alan instead because we're going to record for spite. It doesn't really matter. Support your indie creators. But what you could do for us is leave a rating or review on iTunes or whatever your podcatcher of choice is. That's super helpful. It bumps us up in the algorithms. Share us with your friends, share us with your coworkers, even your enemies. Because if you hate this, tell someone else, and then maybe they'll hate it too. I don't know. Like, just get it out there. It's probably fine. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and we'll catch you next time.